Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network, home to lots of diverse podcasts and most importantly voices, and you can find them on Twitter at Join Nerd Party and on thenerdparty.com. This week I'm joined for an interview by Skye Borgman. Skye Borgman is an award-winning director and cinematographer who has shot over 50 films. Skye's latest Netflix documentary, Abducted In Plain Sight, has become a viral sensation, with everyone who watches this engaging documentary leaving with strong opinions on the subject matter. In 1974, 12-year-old Jan Broberg was abducted from a small community in Idaho. When Jan was returned 5 weeks later, she assured her parents and the courts that nothing had happened, enabling a paedophile to go free and paving the way for Jan's second abduction and years of sexual, emotional and psychological abuse. Skye talks with me about her early influences, her career, Abducted in Plain Sight and much more. Thanks to Skye for joining me, and I hope you'll enjoy this episode. So, thank you very much for joining me today, Skye. It's a real pleasure to talk with you. You're one of the most sort of exciting documentarians kind of on the planet, really, at the moment. Everyone's still talking about your film, and here it is kind of 3 months after it's launched. So it's a real pleasure to be talking with you today.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to be talking to you, too. Thank you so much for having me be a part of your podcast.
Yeah, I kind of want to kind of go back all the way to the start before sort of all the Netflix, everything like that. And I'm always fascinated about what were the kind of the films and cultural influences that kind of inspired you when you were young to sort of go down this route of becoming a filmmaker, and what inspired you when you were, you know, a young kid or adult kind of looking at this as a potential career.
Yeah, I think I have to say that what my first inspiration was National Geographic magazines. I mean, my dad worked for the National Park Service and loved the outdoors. And for as long as I can remember, every month we would get a magazine in the mail. And I was the first one to get to the magazine and would just look at the pictures of really all these different places around the world that I had no idea about, really, except through that magazine. And I grew up in a small town in Oregon and was born in Alaska, raised in Oregon. And it was just, we traveled around the United States every summer pretty much, but this other world that was out there was always really, really fascinating to me. And I think it was that started it. And then once I went to college, and I went to college for theater. Once I got done with that, I really wanted to see the world. So kind of took off for about 5 years and I call it my gypsy years. I just traveled around the world and took in as much as I could take in. I spent about a year in Europe and then 4 years in and around Asia.
Was there anything about these sort of countries that inspired you thinking, I'd love to capture this and bring it back home? It feels like, you know, even in sort of the past 10 years, the world has gotten so much smaller, but, you know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people, you know, places that you're kind of talking about seem so mysterious to America.
Yeah, they were very mysterious. And I think Americans on a whole don't travel quite as far and wide as other people on the planet do. And I think what was really so fascinating to me about them was that mystique a bit and really just trying to figure out what these different places were. And while I was gone, I picked up a camera for maybe not the first time, but for the first time with a real sort of attention to photography and a photographic eye and capturing images of these people and places. And I eventually kind of got to a point where I was like, okay, so what is it that I want to be doing? You know, I had this degree in theater and this kind of new passion for capturing images on film at the time, not digitally, and public storytelling. And so I kind of sat down and said, well, I can continue traveling for the rest of my life, which I loved, but there didn't seem to be much purpose behind that, I guess, unless I was doing something with it. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe it's filmmaking, maybe it's making documentaries. And I think it was that quest to kind of figure out things that I didn't know that has always kind of driven me through life. And that's certainly what's brought me to making films.
When you were you went to film school, what was that sort of process like for you? Was it an exciting one or a frustrating one? You hear about some people that they go in it and then within 5 days they want to leave and just go off and make their movies. Did you sort of enjoy the film school process?
Yeah, the film school process for me was wonderful because I didn't grow up with computers. I didn't have a computer until I was 28 years old. And I wasn't making movies on my iPhone. We didn't have a camcorder that I was doing these things on. It was really my only experience with films had been watching them and loving them. And so for me, I went to USC film program as a graduate student. And that was after I'd done all my traveling. And it was kind of terrifying. I was older, I wasn't directly out of undergrad, and I was with a lot of younger people, and the technology, the computers weren't part of my lexicon really the way it was for everybody else. So it was really good for me because it was an incredibly intense program. I knew I needed something really intense to keep me in one spot, or else I probably would have just taken off and gone traveling again. And so it was great for me because it was intense and it was focused, and it really sort of cemented to me that this is what I wanted to be doing.
So when you sort of come out of film school, what's sort of the next step that turns an education and a passion into sort of a career in this field?
Yeah, especially, I don't know if it's different in other places, but in Los Angeles, I think it's just working as much as you can on every different kind of project you can, and in different capacities. I mean, I came out and I was really working a lot in the camera and really specifically the grip and electric department. I was so sort of obsessed with the imagery and really wanted to be working as a director of photography. And so I started out gripping and gaffing, a lot of gaffing, because I love lighting, and I think lighting really in cinematography is one of the most powerful tools you have in creating a mood and a tone and an atmosphere. And so I did that, and I gaffed while I was working. Look, I was still working as a bartender in a restaurant too. It's how I kind of put myself through grad school, and I continued working at this one phenomenal restaurant for, I think it was 2 or 3 years after I got out of grad school, until I had enough sort of jobs lined up where I could really be making my living at doing it. And it was around that same time where I said, okay, I'm not gonna gaff anymore. I'm really gonna focus on being a director of photography and making my living at that. And so that's what I did for the next few years. And then beyond that, was able to really start picking and choosing the projects that I was working on, and really focused on documentaries.
And what was it perhaps about documentaries that thought, this is the one for me? As you say, you got to try so many different things. What was it about sort of documentaries? Did it tie back to sort of those National Geographic days, or was it one of those ones that was like perhaps the process of being involved?
I think it's a little of both, really. I mean, it was, what's most fascinating about docs to me really is that I get the opportunity to put myself into somebody else's life, really, that I really wouldn't have any opportunity to do in my own everyday life, and to live in their shoes for a little while. And that's something that's really fascinating. And really, it's such an honor, really, that these people kind of allow me into their lives to tell their stories and trust me to tell their stories. And so that's been, I think, the most satisfying thing about documentaries. And also just the idea that these stories would be untold if I weren't there to kind of help put them together and tell them.
You've kind of filmed a rogues gallery of people. You've got rock stars, drug addicts, Academy Award winners, nuns, chocolate makers, prime ministers. It seems that you've covered quite a lot of people in sort of your career. What's it like to handle so many sort of different people, different egos, and different stories? Is that sort of the excitement of what you're doing, is that it's a different story each time, but I imagine they all come with their different pressures and expectations?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is what's most exciting to me, is kind of stepping into a situation, and oftentimes stepping into it without that much of an introduction, and being able to suss it out and say, okay, who is this person? What are they going to respond to? What are they really not going to respond to? How do I sort of step around this room, engage this room, and figure out the best way to really communicate and get the best out of this person?
And has there been a favourite person that in those beginning days, like I was thinking sort of like you've got a prime minister on one hand and drug addicts on the other. It must have been quite a surreal experience at time to go from one to the other. Did you ever have a sort of favourite one that you'd kind of recorded something with?
Yeah, I think probably as soon as you said, I was thinking, this is going to be hard to answer, but immediately Mott Green pops into mind, and he was a character that we followed in Nothing Like Chocolate, and he was the anarchist chocolate maker and really sort of left the world behind, his known world in America behind, and moved to Grenada and really created a place there where local people could raise cocoa beans, farm them, and from tree to bar sort of create this product that was really incredible. And he was a really, really inspirational person. And I think too, it was, I look back at every documentary I've ever worked on, and every single one of them has changed my life in some way. And I think that's really how I decided that documentaries were the way for me to go, because I've had amazing experiences working on scripted films, and they're incredible products at the end of the day, but they've never changed my life in quite the same way that documentaries have.
I'm kind of fascinated as well sort of by your first feature, Junk Dreams. So this sort of sounded like a real family affair. How did you sort of make the perhaps step up to, directing your own feature? How did that kind of come around in 2010?
Yeah, that was really probably not by accident, I would say, but by opportunity. My father bought a Chinese junk boat and wanted to sail it from Port Hadlock, Washington to Valdez, Alaska. And as soon as he bought the boat, I said, well, I want to go with you. And I said, well, if I'm going to take... When we started the trip, we said it was going to take 2 weeks. And at the end of the trip, it had taken 2.5 months. So I knew I was going to be taking some time off from my normal kind of everyday life. But if I was doing that, I wanted to document the whole thing, and I wanted to see what happened. And that was really, I think, probably however long it is, 40 or 50 years from now, when I'm on my deathbed, I think I'll still look back at whatever canon of work I have and still feel like that's my favorite documentary that I will ever have made, because it was my dad and I and my uncle, and it was just a real family journey, and it's flawed, certainly, but it's just such a, I don't know, I think it's a representation of me and my father, and it's a movie I'll always love.
For people that perhaps maybe have seen sort of Abducted in Plain Sight, how can people perhaps around the world find this movie? Is it perhaps on an Amazon rental, or is there any way that people could check out this work?
Junk Dreams?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I'm pretty sure it's you can purchase it on Amazon. And I've got copies too. If anybody wants to email me, it's Skye at Top Knot Films. I can certainly get you a copy. It's on Vimeo. I think if you go to Vimeo and search for it, there's a purchase option there. It's completely different than Abducted in Plain Sight. It's a very sort of nice family movie. It's not one of those jaw-dropping, moment after moment after moment, but it's a wonderful family story.
You mentioned it there, Top Knot Films. What inspired you to kind of create your own company, as opposed to perhaps being, going from job to job? How did something like Top Knot Films come around? Yeah,
my husband, Matt Zattel, and I really created the company because we wanted some place where we could have a voice, and we still do. I'll go to other companies and work for them and still freelance a fair amount, but we both felt it was really important to have a place where we could kind of have these bigger clients that we might be working for, and also be able to parlay that into more passion projects that we felt were important stories that maybe somebody else may not take on. So that's what really started it. I mean, we both, between us, we have quite a few years of experience behind us, and we've got a great team of people that we work with, and we can tell whatever story we want to, and we can just take a lot more chances by having the company than we could, I think, if we were depending on just getting work from other people.
I'd love to kind of talk to you a bit about sort of cinematography in general. And as someone that's been sort of a director of photography in about 50 different films, I'm curious as to what your take is on sort of, I know it's a bit out of date now, sort of the Oscars that have recently just passed. I mean, it was sort of only 2018 before a woman was nominated for cinematography. And even this year, they were talking about sort of scrapping it as being part of the broadcast. Does sort of the representation of lack of representation of women and perhaps this field for, at the highest of the land, does that kind of frustrate you as sort of someone very much involved in that kind of line of work?
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating to me. And it's been really interesting the last year or so for me, because I've, for many, many years been working as a director of photography and was never quite able to sort of break through and be working on the super high budget films as a DP. And then, I love documentaries and was working on a documentary. And now all of a sudden, it seems like as a director, I've kind of been able to get further than I was as a director of photography, which is really interesting to me. And I think being a director has provided a certain pathway, because people believe, and it's true to a certain extent, I think, that you don't have to be as technically proficient or as physically strong to be a director. And I think those are things that people certainly think when you are a director of photography. And so I still think that they trust men more in that capacity, which is ludicrous to me and frustrating to me, because while strength is part of it, you've got a team of people working for you. And I think really mental strength is just as important as physical strength. And it's just, I think the push, like the everybody's talking about, wanting 50-50 representation, which I think would be amazing. But I think people are really fighting for women in the director's seat right now, but you don't hear as many people fighting for women in the director of photography seat right now. There's a few, and the voice is there, but it's a small voice right now. And so I think we might still be waiting on our time to come. I think Rachel Morrison being nominated was amazing. It'll be interesting, though, to see when next a woman is nominated as a director of photography for the Oscars.
Does sort of having your own film company make it a little bit easier to sort of carve out opportunities when sort of they seem to be lacking in Hollywood in general? Do you feel sort of more empowered thinking, right, I can actually go off and direct my own movies, and as opposed to perhaps waiting for people to trust me to take one on?
Yeah, certainly that. But also it's funny because people ask me about representation in the industry. And a lot of times, I feel like I live in a little bit of a bubble, because on the films that we staff and we work on, there is 50-50 representation. And it's a completely normal thing, because we've always been able to hire people with diversities and or been able to hire diverse people. And it's always been paramount to us in the company. And so I'm constantly working on sets that are incredibly diverse, incredibly empowered, and it's not a weird thing to me. It's when I get hired on another set or another crew with a new company that I look around and I'm like, oh, I am surrounded by men. And so I do live in a bubble. I think things are changing. And then I go on to another set and things aren't changing. Or even most recently when I've gone to do interviews, and I've been doing on-camera interviews, which is quite a bit different than where I normally am. And I'm surrounded by an all-male crew. And that's when I really realize that I do live in a bubble, and that I've been able to create this really amazing, wonderful bubble, but it's kind of small in the grand scheme of things.
Because I suppose this was a question for later, but I suppose we segued into it that, on Abducted in Plain Sight, you had a lot of female talent behind the camera as well. And it definitely seems like you want that diversity kind of in the process. And I suppose that gives you that different point of view than just, here's a bunch of white men telling you how to make something or shooting something. Do you feel that ends up reflected in the final product, or the decisions that you make in the editing process or the filming process?
I definitely do. We had, I think, walking into the Brobergs' home, was very different because it was 3 women who walked through that door. And I think it would have been really different if it was 3 men that had walked through that door. And I don't know that they wouldn't have gotten necessarily the interviews that I had gotten, but the Brobergs have a very female energy in the house, and we matched that energy, and we added to that energy, and we fit right into that energy. So I do think it was important that we brought that energy in. That said, James Cood, our editor, is a man and brought a really great perspective to the edit, and it was really wonderful when he and I could be working and arguing about things and agreeing on things and trying these different things. And so having that balance, I think, was also very important to the film.
So how did the story of Abducted in Plain Sight come into your world? It was a story I'd never heard of in my life. How did it kind of come into yours?
Yeah, it was Stephanie Toby, one of the producers on the film. She found the book. She had a mutual friend that knew Jan as well, and had introduced her to the book. And Stephanie hadn't worked on a documentary before, and so came to me because we had worked on a project before together, and gave me the book, and I read it, and I just couldn't understand how something like that could happen. And going back, I really wanted to figure out why a man could kind of infiltrate a family and kidnap a daughter 2 times. I mean, one time, you can kind of wrap your head around that, but 2 times there's something else going on here. And so that's how this story really came about. And when Stephanie brought the film to Top Knot Films, I talked to my husband about it, and we said, yeah, well, definitely we'll take this on. This one sounds interesting.
So how do you go about approaching sort of a family to go, right, we've read this story, let's get you involved in this film? Is there sort of a way that you approach it, whether it's getting in contact first, putting a face to the name, or is it sort of reaching out through lawyers perhaps first? What's sort of the creative process for this?
As much as I can, I reach out to them personally. I mean, it depends a little bit on who the person is, obviously. But with Jan, it was a really personal connection with her, and talked to her about it, and really kind of, Stephanie and I talked to Jan a lot and created a relationship, and before filming ever really started. And I think Jan trusted me to tell her story, and then Jan was really such a driving force behind letting her family know that she trusted us, and made the introduction to her family for us, and that's how it really started. I mean, there weren't really very many middle people involved in this one. It was really us reaching out, us doing, a lot of the research, finding contact information for all the different people, and there were many more people that we had interviewed and or didn't interview but reached out to. I mean, especially Birchtolt's family. We had reached out to all of them to see if they would be interested in talking about their side of the story, and they really just preferred to kind of leave it in the past and didn't really want to come forward and be on camera, except for his brother Joe. But with all of them, it was really me kind of picking up the phone and making a call.
What kind of fascinated me most of all about the film was how at ease that they were about talking about affairs, decisions, personal feelings. In my line of work, I do one-to-one meetings all the time, and it's all about how do you put someone at ease so that they can talk about things that are on their mind. How do you go about achieving that you have these people? Is it sort of hours into sort of a conversation before these sorts of things come out to you, or is it that you've talked about female energy? Is it that people open up quite quickly to you about these sorts of feelings and issues that have been involved in their life?
I think it's more the former than the latter. I mean, I think maybe the female energy helped with these particular people, but I can also imagine it being sort of a blockade to other people. I think a lot of it's how you structure an interview and interview skills. I mean, these interviews were 8 or 10 hours long. They were excruciating. They were long interviews. They were exhausting. And I think it really is, talking about family a lot, talking about what they love, and really getting to the point where it is fascinating how people, or how a camera, I guess, can really change things, both in a positive way and a negative way. But I think you do start to not see the camera so much, or not feel the camera so much when you're being interviewed. And I also think it's an opportunity that people aren't in very often, where they can almost uninterruptedly tell their life story, and nobody's going to sort of cut them off and come in and say, oh yeah, well, I remember you're talking about this, I have the same instance, and then go and tell their life story. But it's a very sort of one-sided conversation, and there's no judgment, and you're just sort of asking a lot of questions, but questions that really encourage them to tell their story in a very uninterrupted way. And it's a very interesting place, because even though you've got cameras and lights around, it's a very intimate relationship that you form with people. And I think that's part of why the Brobergs were really so open and willing to tell their story. And I think it's also 40 years of having this story that they were carrying around with them, and that they were finally willing to tell it all.
So what is it like for you when you're sort of on the other end of the camera or sat opposite them, and certain comments or things come out? What's your thought process when you hear these things? Are you similar to sort of a viewer where you're like, oh wow, I didn't expect it to go this way, or wow, he's being incredibly open here? Or is it one of those ones that you're just focused on thinking, right, this person's at ease, the recording equipment's all working, just letting them kind of spill how they're feeling?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of both too, really, and especially for this one, because I was wearing so many hats during the recording process of the interviews. I was, I'd set up the cameras, and so there's a lot of, okay, do I have the battery power? Are the cards going to run out? Is the sound being recorded properly? And so there's, half your brain is kind of thinking about the technical aspects of it, and I put certain safeguards in place, certainly where I didn't have to worry about batteries. I plugged in house power, but there's all that sort of comes into it. And then beyond that, there was very little, I have to say, I think there was very little judgment during the interviews. I think it was really more of a curiosity and more of just a willingness to listen that was really going on during the interviews. And it was very emotional. We were all at moments laughing, certainly, but there were a lot of moments where we were all crying together, where I was sitting sort of behind the camera, beside the camera, and with tears just streaming down my face, because I could tell the emotion that was there, and the regret and the guilt and all of these things that are sort of wrapped up in what the Brobergs felt. And so they're just such incredible emotional roller coasters, these interviews.
And were there moments of sort of any of the confessions and discussions we thought, ooh, can we actually put this in a film? Or, are they actually aware that they're telling me something, but in reality this will be seen all around the world on something like Netflix? Did you ever have to have a sort of conversation about that, and reminding them that this is going to be going global, essentially?
Yeah, it was, really, I think Marianne had talked about her indiscretions before, in not so much a public way, but her indiscretions kind of, they felt more at ease sort of talking about those. But with Bob, he hadn't really talked about anything that had happened between him and Berchtold in any kind of public way. I mean, I think he had, the family had kind of talked about it, but they hadn't really talked about it. And so I think he was surprised when he talked to us about it. And even after the interview, he said, I can't believe I told you girls what I told you. But he was, it was a big weight, and it was very cathartic for him to talk about it. And when we showed them the film, it was not exactly how we wanted to show them the film. We'd planned to kind of head out there and sit in someone's living room and play the DVD and let them look at it and kind of have this very intimate place where we could view the film together. And then somebody ended up passing away, and they had to travel for a funeral, and so those plans got a little bit upended. And so the first time that we were able to watch the film was at a film festival in their hometown, in a theater full of 300 people, which certainly wasn't ideal. But afterwards, Bob came up to me and he just said he was so grateful for us telling the story the way that we told it. And I think he realized how much a big part his indiscretion sort of played into the manipulation. And without it, there still would have been questions, because in the book that they wrote, neither of the sexual affairs that the parents had were mentioned. And I think that's, once I found out about Marianne's affair, the puzzle pieces just started to really fall into place. And then once we found out about Bob, things just started to, I could see how this could happen. And before I knew about that, I couldn't really quite piece it together.
Yeah, so when you started to, I love the choice that you made to sort of do reenactments. What was sort of the thinking behind that creative choice? Was that something that came in sort of, right, we've got all these interviews, let's now put some of the footage to that? Or was it a case of it was always in your mind for the film?
Yeah, it was always in my mind for the film. I think recreations can be very slippery, and I felt very early on that they were pretty critical to this story for a couple of big reasons. First, I wanted to transport people back in time. I mean, this was a story that happened in the 70s. I think that period of time is important in understanding a little bit of the story. I certainly think the same thing happens today. I don't think it's something that exclusively happens in the 70s, but I think their surroundings and the time period were critical. And I also felt like it was critical to be able to see a little girl, because, you look at the screen and you see this beautiful, amazing, talented, strong woman in her 50s telling the story about when she was 12 years old. And it could be hard to kind of realize that this is a 12-year-old little girl and a 38-year-old man that this is happening with. And so to be able to see a little girl in the circumstances was important to me. And then also, we had shot some verite scenes, but there was nothing really from a verite perspective to kind of get us to the point to have enough to kind of cover what we needed to cover. So recreations from a very early on stage were what I was thinking about. And then we were able to get some of the Broberg's home movies. So matching those, or kind of creating that style, I thought was a great way to kind of transport people back in time.
When you get to the editing process for a documentary like this, you've got so many different elements to pull together. You've got like 8 to 10 hours worth of interviews. What kind of shape was the film starting to take in sort of those early kind of days, and was it sort of what you expected, and was there anything that was tough to cut, or you felt that the movie was maybe missing come the end of the edit?
Yeah, there were certainly, we went through highs and lows with the edit, certainly, and there were a couple of interviews that we had shot with experts to kind of give some context about certain things. And for a while I was, we were cutting these experts in, and the movie was kind of existing as two different movies, because there were no experts, or a couple of these experts that we had interviewed weren't really there during the time and were sort of forensically talking about what had happened based on what we had told them or papers that they had read that we had provided them with. And so it just started to kind of feel like, I don't know, like, I guess two different movies. And so we got to a point where we tried cutting experts in, and it started to feel a little bit educational, which I didn't love. And so we cut them in, and then we cut them out again, and really, really wanted to focus on this family's experience. And I'm very happy that we were able to do that. But I also wish that we had been able to get a little bit more of the context of what was going on, maybe a little more about the FBI and where they were at this point in time, where I think the United States approach to kidnapping was at this time, their thoughts about stranger danger versus the idea that it's somebody that you have very close to you that's doing the majority of the abuse. And so there's a little bit more that I would have loved to try to get that in. And I think too, the LDS Church, and the whole family's relationship to their faith, that I would have liked to explore that a bit more. I certainly feel like it was their faith that helped crack this door open, and I also believe it was their faith that kept them together as a family. So I think there's some complicated roles that faith played in this whole situation. So I would have loved to dig into that a little bit deeper, and every time we tried to do that, it just, again, was this kind of wormhole that ended up spiraling into another direction. So we eventually, went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, but really chose to stay with this family and the ordeal that they went through.
Did you ever sort of think about perhaps turning it into sort of a mini series? These things can be incredibly popular in that format, or was it always, we want to tell this in a film, something that's really kind of focused and structured? Was there any sort of debates between those kind of ideas? Not really. I mean, now maybe it's hard. I mean, I think I was always committed to keeping it a little bit digestible, to keep it at a certain length. I think it would have been fascinating. I really do, to be able to develop it into a 3 or 4 part series. But I think there's also something to be said about the experience of it as a 90-minute film. I think there's something very impactful about it, and I always wanted it to feel like this is what the parents were going through, that this was this chaotic, sort of bombastic experience, and there were things getting thrown at them from every direction, and that they just kind of lost sight of their kids for a little while. And so I wanted that feeling to be there. And I think that's more achievable in a 90-minute film than it is in a 6 or 8 part. So when did Netflix get involved with this film? Was it quite early on in the process, or was it sort of once you've got this finished cut, it's doing the festival circuit? How did they get involved?
Yeah, it was late in the game, really. It was after the film was finished, and we'd taken it to a few festivals, and it was during, let me see if I can get the timeline. So they bought it in January of 2018, but weren't going to drop it until 2019, January 2019. And so there were 2 frames of mind that I had, at least, with that, where I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to be a whole nother year that this isn't out there. And then I kind of quickly shifted and said, but this gives us another whole year to take it out in a very grassroots way and keep showing it to live audiences, which I think it's been part of the best part about this whole process, is being at screenings with people and then having these Q&As afterwards, because they're just electric. I mean, people have so many questions, they have so many feelings, and it's been incredible because I've had people come up to me after, I think, every single screening and tell me that they have had some sort of abuse in their life. And some people, it's been the first time they've ever talked about it. And so there's something really incredible about experiencing this in a group, in a room full of people, kind of hearing how people are responding to it, because everybody in the theater has verbal, physical reactions to it. And I've never been in a theater before, honestly, where I've seen audiences react so vocally to a film before. And it really did affect people, and they really wanted to talk about it. And so I think that year after Netflix bought the film that we were on the festival circuit was the richest lifespan of the film.
Sounds like you got the best of both worlds. Some people say, oh, if a film goes straight to Netflix, it misses that cinema experience, people engaging with it in a darkened room. But at the same time, something like Netflix, it goes all around the world. It sounds like you got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I don't know, I would like to say that I had planned for that, but it just sort of ended up being that, and this whole new resurgence that Netflix has given us. I mean, it's been incredible, because there's nothing like having a champion like Netflix sort of come along and give your film a platform to reach audiences that we could never have reached on a festival circuit sort of platform. And so to have both of those has just been, I mean, we've just been so incredibly lucky to be able to have both.
I'm curious as well. Like I chatted last year with Matt Palmer, who directed Caliber. It was this great Scottish film that went onto Netflix. I'm curious, what's it like for you? Opening weekend, your documentary lands on Netflix. Are you someone at home watching sort of the reactions coming in on sort of social media, or looking at, it's someone's watching it in Iceland and people are watching it in Germany? What's your kind of process like on opening weekend?
Yeah, pretty much that. We were sort of sitting here on the sofa and got onto Netflix and we're like, okay, where is it? And then pretty quickly we started, seeing the buzz that was being created on social media, and it was there were a number of feelings really going on during that time because, people were just sort of shocked by the film, and I think because there'd been no PR really leading up to it. It just kind of dropped on Netflix. Nobody had really known that it was coming. Nobody was expecting it. Nobody was getting excited about it. So they kind of just stumbled upon it. Unless it's people who had seen it before, and we had a certain, sort of audience that was there that had talked about it on social media, but in a much smaller way than what Netflix has actually ended up sort of providing. And so it was kind of watching this pot start to boil. That's really what it was like. And all of a sudden then it was, I think maybe after the first week or the first 2 weeks, it was just so many Google alerts coming in, so much social media just exploding, the memes that were out there. It was just like, oh, wow, this is really resonating with people all across the world.
I remembered it. I think it landed the same weekend as the Fire documentary, and I'll be honest, I went into this movie, I hadn't even heard of it, the story. I remember just sort of flicking through Netflix, and every week on this show we always pick out a film directed by a woman to sort of champion for that week as part of the 52 Film by Women pledge. And I was like, Abducted in Plain Sight. This idea of someone being kidnapped twice. That sounds interesting. How could something like that kind of happen? I remember sort of watching it that opening weekend and not knowing at all what to expect. And you're watching it, you're going, this is really good, and then things will just come out of left field. What's it like for you when an audience reacts in a way to a film like that this is your second feature and it's become something that has gone viral, people are talking about it? You think of how much movies are released by Netflix a week, or even monthly, and a lot of it can get lost. I was at a training day the other day and someone is talking over the table going, have you seen Abducted in Plain Sight? You've got to check it out. What's it like for you to be at the center of that and to see something that you spent years making going out into the world in such a way? Is it exciting, scary? Do you think, oh my God, this is what I've always worked for?
Yeah, it's exciting. I haven't felt much fear yet. I think excited is really the best word, but it's also interesting because I've been working in this industry now for 20 years and this is great. It's amazing. But I also still think about the work that's still left ahead, on more projects and about projects in the past. And what's, I think, the most exciting to me is that it just provides me maybe a slightly easier path to keep moving forward and to keep doing important work. And that's what's I think the most interesting, because it's, the same thing has happened to me. And every time, I don't know, I guess I have a tendency to kind of get underexcited about things because I don't want to get overexcited and have the bubble burst. But I was at a coffee shop the other day and having a meeting about potentially a future project. And we were at the register ordering coffee and, talking about films and things. And then the woman behind the register said, oh my God, have you seen Abducted in Plain Sight? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm here, with a producer of a potentially another project. And the cashier just asked me about my film. And I thought I couldn't have worked out any better than that. It was really a pinch me kind of moment.
Were you apologizing, going, honestly, I haven't paid her to say this. It seems like one of those things you only ever see in comedy films.
Yeah, I know. We actually, the producer's a friend of mine too, and we just kind of turned to each other and gave each other a high five. It was so cool.
like true crime seems to be just exploding just now in terms of podcasts, documentaries. The Madeleine McCann documentary was just on, and there always seems to be a debate about it, sort of the morality of it. Should these stories be told? Should they sort of be banished away? What's your kind of feeling on sort of the this moral debate that's kind of circling the true crime genre?
I can see value on both sides, really. And there were certainly times where during the making of Abducted in Plain Sight, I think ethically as a documentary filmmaker, you have to be asking yourself this question every second of every day, should this film be made? And I think it's important. I think with Abducted, for me, I knew how important it was for Jan and her family to get their story out there. And their reason behind it is honorable. I mean, they want, hopefully, their story to resonate with someone else and help them see what's going on, potentially see what's going on, and be able to remove their child from harm's way. And so I think really, while they can seem exploitive, while mine may seem exploitive, I think that the real reason behind it is that we want to share these stories and save the world. I mean, honestly, I think that's why we make films. I think especially documentary filmmakers, that's why we make films, because we want to find out more about worlds we don't know and tell stories that illuminate places we don't know, people we don't know, so that we can affect people we don't know.
So what is going to be next for you now that you there's talk of new projects? Your work is going viral around the world. What's kind of next for you? Is there any sort of exciting projects that you've got in mind, or is there a dream passion project that you're working on that you hope will come to light now?
Yeah, there's so many, projects that I've sort of had in my pocket that I've been dreaming about making. I mean, there've been a lot of incredible emails that I've gotten since the film has come out with people who have incredible stories to tell. It's an exciting time because there are so many good stories out there. People have been wanting a sequel to Abducted in Plain Sight, which I think would be incredible. I have a friend who's a pornographer's daughter I've wanted to tell her story for 20 years. And I think that would be amazing. So I've got a couple of irons in the fire, and we'll see what kind of ends up lifting to the top, because look, I'm in a really great position right now to tell some exciting stories. So I'll keep you posted for sure.
Excellent. And we always do this at the end of every episode. We always recommend a film or a documentary, something directed by a woman for people to check out. Is there any sort of work that you would love to champion that people should seek out on Netflix or any sort of where in the world just now that's really inspiring you?
Oh, well, a good friend of mine, Jen McGowan, recently directed a film called Rust Creek. Another great friend of mine, Ioana Urakaru, directed a film called Lemonade. These are two films that you may not have heard about. They're certainly out there. They're doing really, really well. But I would love for you to go and watch those two films. Another good friend of mine, Jenny Waldo, is doing a feature film right now called Acid Test. She did a short and is now turning it into a feature film. So those are three great, powerful, incredibly different women who are doing some really good work.
Excellent. I'll be sure to check them out. But if people wanted to kind of keep up to date with any of your projects that are coming together or your line of work, or reach out to you to talk about sort of Abducted in Plain Sight, where could kind of people find you on sort of social media or your webpage?
Yeah, all my social media is Skye Borgman, SKYEBORGMAN. I'm better at some than others. I'm really trying to get better at Twitter. So I'm working hard at that, but I'm still not great at it. You can go to our website. I've got two. My personal website is skyeborgman.com, and then our company website is topknotfilms.com. So definitely, I'm interested in people's stories too, in stories that haven't been told before. So I think they're important. I think the big headline stories are one thing, but I think there's a lot of stories that aren't hitting the headlines that are equally, if not more, important to tell.
Absolutely. And I suspect you're not being great at Twitter means that you actually have the time to go make fantastic films and work all around the world, while the rest of us have got our heads in our phones. So I think you're maybe doing something actually right there.
Right.
But it's been a real pleasure to talk with you today and talk to someone that's made some fantastic work. And I hope people will check out this film if they're not already and dive into something from your past as well, Junk Dreams. So thank you very much for joining me today, Skye. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.